Welcome to part 2 of the Tekla template editor for reports training video. In the first video, in part 1, we were talking about the different types of out-of-the-box reports that we can access here, as well as some of the different options on the report dialog box. And in this video, we're going to actually go through how to create your own reports using the template editor in Tekla to accomplish the different goals and things that you need. All right, let's start with opening up the template editor. We'll go to the File menu, Editors, and then here there is the Template Editor option. This will open up the Tekla Template Editor, which is actually a completely separate application from Tekla Structures. So here's Tekla Structures, and then on the taskbar we can see that there's the Template Editor. If I go to File, Open, you'll see that it goes to the default directory where the XS templates directory is set in your advanced options, which in this case I'm using the US Imperial environment, and you can see the template folder here. So you can open any existing templates or reports from anywhere in the installation. Now, TPL files basically are graphical templates, and that's going to be for title blocks and bill of materials. That's outside of the scope of what we're training today. We're going to be training on report files, which are going to be .rpt file extensions. And so you have graphical templates, which are title blocks and bill of materials, and then you have textual templates, which are going to be for reports. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to actually create a new report. So we'll say new, and here we go. We have graphical versus textual. So we're going to go ahead and do textual because we're doing a report. And then first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to save this this actual template here. So what we'll do is instead of saving this in the installation, templates reports can actually be read from the model folder. So I'm going to go in here to my model folder that I'm currently working on, and I'm going to just say like my first report. Now, you can put a .rpt extension, but if you actually want this report to open up like as a comma separated values or a CSV file within Excel, then I'm actually going to put the alternate extension first, then I'll put a .rpt at the end. So that's a little bit of a trick there if you're doing a CSV or comma delimited file. All right, so my first report.csv.rpt, and again, I'm saving it inside of the model folder. Now the very first thing that I want to do is I see that there's a magenta line and then a black line here on my template. And this is basically like a page line or a gap between the page or paper border versus the actual report output or your margins. So if I double click on the background, it opens up the properties, and I'm just going to zero these values out. Because when you're doing like a CSV file, you don't want these extra margins at the left or the right or the top and the bottom. You really just want it to be nice and tight here. Then same thing with the height. If you don't specify like a very large number for the height, you'll get actually a page, a new page kind of character inside of your report, which may look funny in your data. And so what we want to do is we're just going to say 99999, a pretty significant number, which will probably be outside of the scope of how many items are actually in your report. But that way you don't see any new page markers basically here. So we'll go ahead and say OK, and now you can see the magenta and the black lines are overlapping. So we'll just go ahead and save, and then we'll go ahead and start with our header. So let's go to the Insert menu, Component, and we're going to choose Header. So this is going to be output at the top of the report, and it's going to only be output one time. So it's the overall header for the actual report file. Now, next what we're going to do is we're going to say Insert Text or Value field. You can also do this from the toolbar icons here, so text or value field. So if we say text, let's just go ahead and say job number. And I'll put a colon here. And so this is just a generic text, and then I just pick with my mouse here inside of this header row where I want to place that text. And then you can also grab it and just drag it by holding down your left mouse key here, or left mouse button, sorry about that, to actually drag it around. You can also cut text, and then you can come back in here and paste it to place it somewhere. So it's easy to manipulate and graphically move things around. Now, next thing we'll do is we'll actually insert a value field. So text is just generic text. It's exactly what you type in there. A value field actually reads data from the model, either the project properties or reads the current date and time, as well as information from model objects or drawings, like we saw in part 1 of the video. Now let's go ahead and just use here under project information, we want to get the job number. So there's project number there. And if I want to, after I place that here by just clicking to locate it, if I double click on that value field, I can increase the number of characters. Let's say that our job number is really long, And so if it's more than 10 characters, we want to increase that here so that way all the characters will be displayed in the report. Now, the other thing here is you can specify which side the text is justified on. So if you had something that was only 5 characters long and you set this to right justified, then basically the report will output from the right side of this 20 characters and come to the left. Here we want to go from left to right, so we're going to say left justified. And basically you can also specify other things like what type of data this is, as well as what is its meaning. And that'll make more sense when we do some of the part properties and value fields here in a moment. Okay, so now that we've got that in there, next thing would be to actually put in some of the column headers that we would want at the top of the report for what the different attributes that we're going to output. So let's go ahead and say insert text, and let's say that I want to output the profile. I'll output the part name, and then maybe here the length, just as a good example. So that's what we'll go ahead and start with. So I'll just place this text here, and I actually may not want as many of those characters or extra rows, so we can just move the text up. And then here, if you just click on the row, you can grab this, basically this grips here, and you can just move that up so that way the row is nice and tight. If you leave this extra space here, the report will output those 2 extra rows. So you may not want that extra space. So you just tighten this up, and then there you go. So now we'll go ahead and just save our report, and then we'll start inserting a part row, so that way we can actually output some information. All right, so next we're going to go back to Insert, Component, Row. And here when I go to the drop down, you can see that there are a variety of different row types. And really what this is these are the different objects that are in Tekla structures in the model, as well as drawings. Now in this particular case, we're just going to do a very simple part row. So we'll just go ahead and choose part, press OK, and now that new row is inserted here. Now when I insert value fields, so if I say insert value field and then I pick in this area here, now notice that it actually gives me all of the attributes that are associated to the row type, which in this case, it's a part. So the first thing we were looking for is profile. So if we just press P here, it'll actually bring us down to that location where P's are at, and we can go ahead and select profile. If you see a plus icon here next to the property, it actually unfolds some additional sub-properties here. This is great. Sometimes I use profile data such as the width, the height, or flange thickness, or web thickness if I want to quickly get some profile information across the job to make detailing decisions about my connections or something like that, to standardize things. So sometimes reports can be really handy for just giving you quick data on things, not just giving you overall reports on information, but even dimensionally or geometrically finding quick information. Now we're just going to go ahead and say profile here, so I'll just select that. And then when I double click on it, you'll see here that it says that this is a text or a string. Which it is. It's just a profile description of that, left justified, and then the character lengths are 14. Now, if you have some really long profiles in your environment, you might want to increase this. Like I get some really large HSS tube steel sizes sometimes, so I may increase this to 20 characters. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a comma here, so that way this will separate this in the Excel file. So we just insert that text and place that, then I insert the next value field. So I'll just go ahead and put name in here. So I'll just type in NA for name. We just say OK, and now we've got the name field in here. Again, if you need to increase the number of characters, you can easily do so. Now we can either copy and paste the text or insert the comma. So let's just copy and then paste. And now I put that there. We'll just go ahead and save. And then now let's do the last one here, insert value field, and we'll go ahead and say length. So now I've selected length here, and I'll just go ahead and say OK. And again, in the Imperial environment, sometimes you get some really long lengths with a lot of extra 16ths and stuff in there. So I might do something in here like 18 just to give me a good value. And again, I'm going to say left justify here. And one thing you'll notice that's different about this one is that you'll see that there's actually a meaning to the value, and then you're saying what units output do you want for this. So it's a length data type, number with decimals, right? Because it can be a number dot something for fractions of an inch, etc. And then we can output the data and round it to the nearest 16th or whatever value that we want. All right, so we've got that there. We're just going to press OK. And so pretty much we've got all of the fields based on our headers here actually being output on the rows. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm just going to drag this up so it tightens it up. We don't have any extra lines there. And next, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly double click on the row. Now, there's something really important to understand about the row properties. There's this sorting type. So there's combine, none, and distinct. If you actually want individual, like every part that is output in the report to be distinctly reported out, even if the properties are all the same, then you choose the distinct option. If you want them to be combined together to get a quantity of the items that are have the same properties, then you choose the combine option. So let's go ahead and do distinct at first, just so you can see what that looks like. So we'll set that there and we'll press save, and then we'll go into model and run our report. So now here back in Tekla structures, if we go to the reports and then we go down here, we see that there's this my first report. If I just say create from all, you'll see that it actually creates the report. There's the job number in the header with the 1000 value field. Then we have profile name and length, and then you can see all of the different parts in the model, and you see the profile value, the name, and the length, and they're all separated by commas here. Now, this opened by default in the default report viewer within Tekla, and if we actually wanted to open this up in Excel, then we'll go ahead and switch the options here to with associated viewer. So let's go ahead and say create the report again and overwrite it. And then here we basically open this up in Excel and we've got everything we need. So we can just select these rows and then we can just say format, auto fit column width. And now we've got basically easily data that we can review. Now notice here again, because I did distinct rows, that objects that actually have the same profile column, or sorry, profile name and length, they're output multiple times. But let's say we wanted to get a quantity of that. So let's go ahead and show that next. But a couple other things here just quickly in Excel if you wanted to. You could add basically in here filters if you wanted to. So you could just say quick filter, so that way you could filter by certain values. So this is what's really handy. You just quickly do a CSV file, get the data out of Tekla that you need, and then you can quickly do things in Excel to manipulate and leverage that data. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and edit my text string in the header here, and I'm going to go ahead and include QTY for quantity. And then what I'll do is I will insert a comma. So let's say comma here right after that. And then what I'm also going to do is I'm going to insert a value field, which is going to be the numbers. So I'll go ahead and type in NU for number, and this shows me number of objects. So I'll go ahead and place that in there. Now I'm going to double click on this value field and I'm going to increase the number of characters to say 10. Now one other really important thing here is actually specifying whether or not we want these values to be summarized together. So if we come in here and you'll notice that it doesn't allow me to actually summarize across rows. So this is because of the row properties. Watch this. I'm going to go back to the row here, and instead of saying distinct, I'm going to say combine. When I do that, if I go back to this value field, now notice when rows are combined, it allows me to have these options. So what I basically want this to do is that whenever it outputs any rows that have the same properties, so the same profile, length, and name, then basically it's going to increase this counter or this quantity. So I'm going to say some value across all rows. We'll just go ahead and say OK. Then we're going to go ahead and save. And now let's go back to Tekla and run this report, and we'll see that it outputs a little bit differently. So back here in Tekla, I'm going to go ahead and say create from all, and it'll open this up in Excel. And now notice that we have a quantity field. So basically, if there's anything that has identical like properties, it's going to output those here as a multiple or a quantity. So this is great if you're doing bill of material type reports or advanced bills or quantity-based type reports. All right, now what if we want the report to actually be interactive with the model? So let's go ahead and get rid of this quantity here, and I'm going to even increase the report width a little bit. So let's make this 100 characters, so that way we can fill in some extra values. I'm going to then change the header here, text from quantity to GUID, which GUID just stands for Globally Unique Identifier. So every object in the model has its own unique ID or GUID. Now what we'll do is we'll just edit this comma here, and we'll include GUID in lowercase with a colon after it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a value field, and we're going to go ahead and just type in GUID. There it is. Select OK. And now we have the GUID here placed in. So again, you can see this is a pretty long field, so that's why I increased the width of the report a little bit. So we'll just go ahead and say save. Now it says that there's some overlapping objects. So I'm going to go ahead and say no, don't do that. And so let's just increase this maybe a little bit. Let's do 110. That might have been my issue. And then here, let's just make sure these aren't overlapping, which looks okay. And then we'll say okay. And then I think we've got everything set. So let's go ahead and save. And now we're okay. Now, basically what's going to happen is every object that's in the report is going to be listed out line by line. So it's going to kind of like be distinct. So let's just go ahead and switch that back to distinct because we don't really care about a quantity anymore. We want each object to be reported out. So let's go ahead and save that. We'll go back into the model and we'll run the report. Okay, so now we're back in the model and we're going to say create report. Now, I intentionally opened this up in Excel just so you can see like how the data is being output, but this cannot be intelligently linked with the model. So like because this is a separate application, when I click on these lines, it doesn't highlight the objects in the model. If I want to be able to do that, I've got to switch this back to using the internal Tekla viewer for the reports, and then we'll just go ahead and say create from all. Now, when I do this, if we highlight different objects here, it actually highlights that object in the model. Now, if I've got a really large model and I don't know where that object is, again, I can right click and I can just say zoom, zoom to selected, and it will bring me into that specific object. So what's great about this is that you can now interactively run this report. If you're doing things like checking data or looking for certain information, you can easily select these items and then get zoomed to the model to either fix that or to investigate whatever it is that you're specifically looking for. Now, sometimes I'll run reports, twice. I'll run and open this up in Excel, and then I'll also open it up here within the editor, so that way I can not only select objects, but in Excel, I might be able to fill in some statuses or some notes for myself about that particular line item. So that's kind of up to you. Just gives you some different ideas of what you can do here. Now, the next thing to kind of talk about is that you can see that the report is actually output and sorting items by the different fields. So notice that all of these profiles are progressing from smaller profiles to larger, and HSSs are reported before the W10s. And then same thing over here. It goes first by profile, then name, then length, right? So there's some sorting mechanisms that are going on behind the scenes. So let's take a look at that. So when we come back into the template editor, if you look over here on the left, you'll see that there's the part row. So we have an Explorer window to basically investigate each of the objects that are in our template. Now here we have the profile value field. Okay, notice that there is an AZ with a down arrow on it. If we actually go inside of here, you'll see that there's a sorting order specification that you can set. So there's ascending, descending, and then you can also set to none if you don't want it to be considered at all. Now in this particular case, we want ascending. So like I want the smaller profile sizes first, and then it goes up to the larger. And since this is text, it's going to be in alphabetical order. So A is going to be output before B, C, etc. All right, so then over on name field, you notice that in the actual the tree view here, that name is after profile. So since name is below profile, that means that it will be sorted after profile is sorted first. So it kind of sets the order in which things are actually going to be sorted. Now watch this. If I select on this and then I move it up here above profile, it doesn't actually move anything here graphically in the template. So things will output wherever they were before, but basically it just heightens or increases the sorting order to sort by name before profile. So that's what moving things up and down here basically does. Now, in one case, if you have a really large model or you have lots of different value fields, what it does make sense to do is not put sorting on things that don't need to be sorted. So in this case, GUID doesn't matter, so I don't really need it to do that extra work of sorting by GUID. So I can just double click on that and say none. When I do that, you'll notice that the actual visual field here changes and it turns into a different icon. Now let's say that I actually wanted to do some rules here on this row, so that way I want to filter out and only find certain things. So if we double click on the row properties here, there's this wizard and advanced option here, and then there's a rule box. Now it's currently empty by default, but if we go to wizard here, let's go ahead and select on an attribute and say that if any of the part rows here, if the part, let's say phase number as an example. So if the part phase equals let's just say a number here, 11, then output this row. So here it automatically fills in kind of this code here of an if-then statement to basically output this row. So if the phase equals 11, then this row will be output. Otherwise, it's going to skip this part and not output the row in the report. Now, we don't want this to be hard-coded, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to take this out, and then we're going to actually come in here and we're going to say get value, and then we're going to get a project property real quick. So what we'll do in here is we'll just say select the actual attribute or value, and we're going to go to the project property. So let's get, scroll down a little bit here. So we go to project, and then if we go to, I'm sorry, not project, I take that back. Here underneath the part attributes, what we're looking for is the title 1 field. So this title 1, title 2, and title 3, this comes from the report dialog box. So I'm going to go ahead and say title 1. So basically, if the phase number equals the value that we input in the title 1 field in the report dialog box, then output this row, else step over. So this is kind of like a quick way of doing almost like a selection filter in the model or in the report itself. So rather than setting up a selection filter in the model and then running report from selected, I'm actually running a report from the entire model, but I'm building in intelligence where I can just quickly enter in the phase number that I want to filter out. So let's go ahead and just press check to make sure that all of the syntax on this formula is correct, and it looks like it is. So we'll say OK, and I'll just press OK. I'll then save my report, and now let's go back into the model. So this is the title field that we were talking about. So I've got a few different phases here in the model. If I go to my Manage tab and I go to Phases, you can see that I've got a variety of different phases. So let's say that I only want to see the steel that's in phase 5. So I'll type in phase 5 here, and I'll say Create from All. Now what this does is it only outputs the data that's in phase 5. So if I hold down the Shift key and select all these objects, you'll see that here it's actually selecting all the objects that are in phase 5. So this is just a neat way to filter down if you're looking for very specific items and you want to have the ability to control that versus hard-coded into your report. You can use these title fields to give input to your reports for different rules and intelligence. So that concludes the basic training here in video part 2. In part 3, what we'll actually do is we'll talk about nested rows, where you can actually report assemblies, then children parts that are part of that assembly, and then even children bolts or studs that are a part of those parts. So basically coming in here and saying insert row and selecting, for instance, here a bolt row, and then basically moving this down one level so that way it's a child of the part. So it'll output in this row only the bolts, shop or field bolts that are associated to this specific part. So that'll be in training video part 3.